Hey everyone, back again. So today I'm doing something different. I sent out a poll asking who'd be interested in one of Marx's chess games, in fact, the only one that we have a recording of, and here it is. So Marx here is playing with the white pieces against someone named Mayer, we aren't sure if that's actually their name, but in any case, we have Meyer playing the black pieces. Now, before jumping into it, hi, I'm David. If you're new here, welcome. I try to explain philosophical concepts and ideas in a way to make them accessible to you. So if you're new, like, share, subscribe. I don't normally do chess content. I'm not a particularly good chess player. I just enjoy it. But there's actually some good insight about Marx's theories that can be gleaned from this game. And I take these from a dissertation that was actually written a few years ago in 2013, the University of Santa Cruz, California, or in California, where the author essentially explains how this game sort of fits within the broader scope of Marx's project, if you can believe it. And that I'll add a link to that, but it was titled, or from the University of California, Santa Cruz, Storming Fortresses, A Political History of Chess in the Soviet Union, 1917 to 1948, by Michael A. Hudson. So I'll have a link to that. You'll be able to read it. It's very interesting. But it helped me understand Marx's appreciation of chess and how it fit within his overall work. But anyways, so yeah, if you're new here, welcome. These are the kind of things that I do, normally philosophical concepts and ideas. If you want to help me out, like, share, subscribe, tell your friends, who knows, they might get a kick out of it. Or you can help me out monetarily via Patreon or PayPal, but obviously no pressure. And yeah, so this is this game, and it was between Marx and Meyer. Now, to talk a little bit about Marx's appreciation of chess, this dissertation that I read segments of details how Marx spent like hours upon hours and upon hours playing, and you can actually see that in this game here, where many of Marx's moves correspond to what we know now to be really strong moves. Some of them not so strong moves, but in any case, he knew his stuff. He knew his stuff according to what is still held today to be standard chess theory. Proper chess moves in certain situations at the beginning of, most notably at the beginning of games. And it features, by Marx, it features a very interesting opening. Now, it's not one that's super common, especially with people at my level, but among great players, of course, they'll know how to play this opening. But it's a very profound opening, and it really speaks to Marx's own approach to dialectical materialism, if I dare say, and scientific socialism, or it might not. And that's what is interesting, and what Hudson argues in his dissertation. So yeah, without further ado, let's get into this here. So it starts out with the King's Gambit opening. King's Gambit looks like this, is this setup. In fact, the engine gives it like a no, you can't do that. So I'm using this on Lee Chess telling us don't do this. But in any case, it's a neat opening. Now, it's a gambit because it's offering a pawn or a piece, in this case a pawn. A piece is one of these pieces, except the king. You can't gambit the king, even though it's called the King's Gambit. Anyways, whatever. So it's offering this pawn essentially for rapid development. So you could follow through by capturing this pawn, and of course Meyer ends up doing that, and it will leave white open to start bringing their pieces out. What it also does, though, is open up certain risks. What it does is it opens up this queen, black queen, to come into the game via h4 to h4, which then puts direct pressure onto the king. And that can be a problem. If you play the King's Gambit, you always have to be aware of this, because it's going to hurt you if you aren't prepared, especially if the knight here has had time to kind of work itself over, and then, I don't know, maybe it had captured this piece, and then there's going to be pressure on this one, and it could be a whole big mess. So Meyer responds by capturing on f4, and Marx follows through with seems to be a basic developing move, and now we get setting up what will come out to be a Muzio Gambit. Now, Marx sets this up by bringing out his horse to f3. And this is the Muzio Gambit because what it is doing is it's now going to be preparing to offer this horse, as well as that earlier pawn that was here, which is a very risky move. And the engine doesn't like it very much. So the engine is giving this a very strong favor for black in this position. Now, as you can probably see down here, there are quite a few top-level games in which this was played. We have Hikaru Nakamura, who's probably the world's top speed chess player, versus Vasily Ivanchuk, very famous grandmaster, of course. Again, Hikaru had this position and won this position, whereas he tied. But as we see quite often, this is losing for white. White will lose this game because we see black winning all here. So this really attests to the fact that Marx was a little bit of a daredevil when it came to chess. So in this position here, white's knight is under attack, but Marx doesn't care. He just castles. Now this is the Muzio Gambit, or the Muzio, I don't know why I said Muzio Gambit, that is offering up this horse. And at the time in chess, it was maybe considered a little bit unsportsmanlike not to accept a gambit. So if your opponent offered you a gambit, you take it. Whereas now I think people are probably a little bit more cautious. If someone offers a gambit, offers a piece to you that is a full piece, chances are you're going to get hurt if you are not prepared for what might come after it. So of course Meyer captures it, and Marx follows through by capturing that pawn back. So at this point now, Meyer is up a pawn and a horse to just Marx having a pawn. So this is not good for Marx. And as we will see, it will be not good for Marx for pretty much the duration of this entire game, which is all very riskily done. So now Meyer brings out more firepower on the king side. That is the side that the king starts on, this side here. Where most of this game is actually going to play itself out is on the king side, which is also one of the elements of the king's gambit. And Marx tries to attack this pawn, but of course all it is doing is offering up this pawn to the queen because this pawn is not being defended. One of the risks presented here, though, is that if Meyer captures this pawn, which he indeed does, what that is doing, and for anyone who's doesn't know chess all that well, it's always a risky move to put the queen in front of the king. In this situation, it's not that risky because the queen can essentially go anywhere. But in situations where, let's say this rook was defended on this potential square on e1, if this rook could come here while the queen was in front of the king, the queen wouldn't be allowed to move left or right. The queen would be forced to sit right in front of the king because it can't leave the protection of the king here. That is, it cannot open an attack on the king, so it would have to give itself up from this rook. So it's always a little bit dangerous, but nothing really comes of it here. So Meyer captures it, that threat isn't present, and here we see still a big advantage for black. Marx follows through with a move that opens up this c1 bishop, and also, which is ultimately going to be an effort to try to bring this rook, the a1 rook, into the game all the way over to e1, but that's going to come a little bit later. And here we go with another developing move, bringing more firepower over to the king side. Here we still get a big advantage for black. And now the engine is telling us that this bishop should be capturing this pawn here, but of course Marx doesn't. He's leaving it up to chance. Now, how much of this at the time was so-called book knowledge, that is, ideas that were set in stone, is not totally clear. But in any case, Marx very much knew what he was doing. He handled this quite well. And here we get more developing moves, bringing out more pieces, because Meyer is sort of sitting on this position. And here we get finally this rook over attacking the black queen, so the black queen is going to be forced to move. Top engine move was to bring it to the d4 square, which would essentially throw a check in there. I think that he was probably worried that if he did that, there would be it would invite the king over to h1, which maybe Meyer didn't think there would be a good way to continue this because the light square bishop that would be able to put pressure along this diagonal is still quite a few moves away from getting out of its kind of captivity here. But I'm no chess expert. I don't really know why Meyer didn't do that, but he chose instead to go to here, to the f5 square, which is a little bit setting up what will be Meyer's demise. Even though in this position we have still a significant advantage for black. So Marx now starting to introduce his own possible counterattack. Now, there isn't the risk here is it's actually a dual-pronged risk. So Marx is threatening to capture here with the bishop, perhaps, or with the rook, perhaps. It's not all that impressive because it's being defended by this knight. But really, the big threat here is capture on c7. And what that would do is it would produce a fork that would check the king, forcing the king to move, in which case the horse could then capture this rook, which is much more valuable than the knight. So in order to defend against this, Meyer just moves his king over so that it won't be checked and it won't be x-rayed by this rook any longer, because so long as this king was on the e8 square, this knight on e7 couldn't move, because you can't move and open up an attack against the king. So it follows through, and here we get, according to the engine, a bad move by Marx. And this also turns out to be a position that's never been, at least according to the Lee Chess database, never been reached again. And this might signal that Marx at this point is starting to employ less book knowledge, maybe less scientific, rational knowledge here to his playing of chess, and instead trying to introduce some more imagination to it, because it is a position that hasn't been reached again, at least among masters games. But with that being said, and this is something that Hudson argues in his dissertation, is that this might signal the extent to which Marx's scientific socialism, as that is imagined, leaves room for imagination and creativity. It's not a complete submission to a kind of iron cage, as Weber describes it, a complete submission to instrumentalization and to operationality. It is opening up the possibility of newness, of creativity. And here we start to see that playing out a little bit. Marx will end up taking some risks that will end up paying off in the end. Of course, it helps that Meyer makes a pretty significant error that isn't totally clear that it's an error, but it does shift the tides here. So in order to avoid this bishop attacking the rook, Meyer just sidesteps with g8, moves the rook over to g8, which is, the issue here is that it's going to be leaving this pawn ultimately undefended. Whereas, as the engine is saying, if he had moved over to f8 instead, it would have allowed more defense of this pawn, which will be a problem later. So Marx, now opening up another X-ray attack against the king, sees his opportunity here to maybe put his own pressure that was starting to kind of build against his king. He's starting to have some kind of a counterattack, but still at this point, black is in a much better position. Most players, expert players today, would choose black than white if they had to continue from here. Now, in order to counter this black bishop, or this white bishop on f6, Meyer just simply moves his own bishop over to g5 to put this pressure on it here and to essentially get rid of it. And that's what we will see happen here. We will see a trade, captures, and we are left with this position in which it has opened the f4 pawn to be captured. Now, of course, Meyer can't capture back, because then Meyer will just lose the queen. And here we see the beginning of the errors for Meyer. Most notably, there was a lost opportunity here coming to d4, but Marx has to just dodge this. We see our biggest error unfold right now, where Marx putting this attack against the black queen on g5 with the h4 pawn, or the pawn moving to h4, turns out to be a huge opportunity lost for Meyer. Now, Meyer wants to keep the pressure here, and what I mean by that is that he's going to keep his queen deep into white's position, which turns out to be, as these little symbols indicate, a blunder. Now, what Meyer is dreaming of here is eventually one day utilizing this battery. Now, batteries, when you have one piece along the same diagonal or along the same line, enforcing another piece. And the threat here is, of course, checkmate. Now, this is still far away. It's being defended by this piece. It's being defended by this queen. So this threat isn't immediate. But if I had to guess, I assume that Meyer was hoping one day this will come into play. Of course, the top engine move is to have brought the queen back to g7 in order to provide more defense here, all the while maintaining this battery. But this move that he made essentially lost him the game, just because it was a move. He didn't really see the dual prong nature of the queen and rook here. The queen and rook are still deadly from even with the queen on g7, but in any case, he didn't see this opportunity. So he follows through with this blunder that allows Marx to, of course, capture this pawn, forcing the rook away. The rook is going to have to leave this battery and is now too late. Whereas previously, if you'll remember, the engine was requesting that or hoping that the rook would go over to f8 much earlier, 4 moves ago. So that opportunity was lost, and now what we have is a position in which this queen is starting to feel a little stranded, and pieces are starting to get a little bit overworked, and they're finding awkward pieces to be on. So Marx, in an effort to try and put pressure on this queen, plays this move, which is maybe a little bit more reactionary than it is actually productive. And the reason for that is because it's only putting pressure on a piece that can just easily move away. And of course, Meyer has to move away. There's only really one place it wants to go, which it should have gone to last turn. But anyways, it finds its solace here. And even in this position, Black is still leading. Black still has a better position overall. That is because Black is still up a piece, is still up a horse. As you can count, there are 2 horses on the black side and only 1 on the white side. So Marx wants to kick away this knight, but goes the wrong way. And this will, I don't know how much this would have changed the actual game, but in any case it does, at least according to the engine. Because moving here, maybe Marx, seeing how he's been playing so far, would have thought to capture it, where if the horse had come to instead g6, Marx probably would have captured it or done something with it, because otherwise this bishop on the side would have been a little bit awkwardly placed. But anyways, didn't do that. So now the horse has got to move, moves over to c6. Engine does not like that, even though it turns out to be a decent defense against a checkmating opportunity. The engine does not like it. In fact, at this point, the game is equal. So it continues through with here, just getting some, adding some defense to this pawn, which was being doubly attacked by the queen and this horse. Now, with the added pawn defense, there's no threat there. And there's a kind of this mysterious move by Meyer, where there's all this activity on the king side, all this activity building. We have these rooks threatening to come into the game. We have this pretty strong bishop cutting off a possible escape for the king. And Meyer decides to move this pawn, which is very strange, and it gives white a huge advantage, unsurprisingly, because all it has essentially done is given white more opportunities to develop. And that is what Marx does, or to mount an attack. Now Marx delivers this move, which offers does what's called a royal fork. It forks the king, forcing the king to move, or for the knight to be removed, and it also threatens to capture all of these pieces. So of course, Black only has one option here, and that is to recapture with the bishop. But in doing so, it opens up this finale that will leave Meyer absolutely hopeless. And that is with capturing on f8, forcing, of course, Black to capture back with the queen, because otherwise there's just, if Black moved the king, which was the other opportunity, by moving this king up, then this rook would be able to capture that rook all the way over there, and that would just be lights out. So Meyer captures back. Here we have capture here, and all this pressure is being mounted against the king here. There's this bishop is cutting off that escape. This queen is cutting off this escape. All it takes at this point would be for a rook to get onto this back rank, and there are going to be very few options for black at this point. So in the face of this, Meyer makes another kind of strange move, bringing this rook up to here, which is completely doesn't make any sense to me why Meyer had done this. It just seems like a wasted move, because in order to make this rook actually productive, you're going to need to do some kind of maneuver like this, one move here, and then bring it in. So that's 2 moves or 3 moves to bring it into the game. Or if these pieces move still, you need to move this, you need to move this. It's too many moves before white would be able to mount a really effective counterattack or attack before black could mount his counterattack. But in any case, that's what he does. And as the engine is suggesting, white just simply sidesteps his rook to f1, putting pressure on this queen, forcing the queen to move. And the queen goes in a bad spot, whereas the queen could have offered here by coming to g8, could have offered a queen trade, which would have been beneficial for black, because at this point in the game where black is still up a piece, it would have been nice to clear the queens off the board. But doesn't do that, moves the queen over to g7, which is just opening up more risks here. Now with this move, white is effectively threatening checkmate with queen to d7. That would checkmate the black king, because that queen would then be covering this, and this. There's no way to get out of that. That would be bad. So to defend against this, Meyer brings his horse over to b8, which covers this square, but that proves not to be enough. Marx delivers the final blow here with rook to f7. And of course, it was in this position that Meyer resigned. And the reason for that is that Meyer is going to be forced to capture this rook, because if not, the threat is, of course, if I could come to here and to continue from here, play with the computer. We could see how this goes. Strength. Do I do a risk? I'll probably still end up losing. Strength 8, play as white from here. It's going to be not so fun. So white, of course, or black, of course, has to capture. And even if we went to abort here, analysis. So white has to, of course, capture this, because if not, chooses not to, the threat is, of course, I don't even know what else you do. Let's say he continues with some strange rook move. Of course, this is the threat, and this is checkmate. Checkmate because the bishop is covering there, and all these squares are being covered by these pieces. So black, of course, has to capture, in which case loses the queen, and then, as that top chess move said, brings this horse over, covering this square. To avoid checkmate, because of course you're going to lose your queen. So then the engine just recommends picking up the pieces here, just essentially picking up all the pawns it can, and we'd follow through, blah, blah, blah. Sure, throw a check, probably even getting ready to capture this horse. Captures here, capture the horse, so capture with the queen. And yeah, and this will just be absolute, it says to capture here. In real life, I probably would have done something like this. And it says to capture there, captures back, blah, blah, blah. And yeah, and this was something like this, check, run away. Yeah, captures here, just give up the queen, doesn't matter, start pushing this pawn. Doesn't matter what black does, push the pawn. And then we're just gonna bring ourselves another queen, and that'll be it. So it was in that position that Meyer resigned, because there was simply nothing else to do. And that was one of Marx's only chess games that is recorded. In fact, the only one, I believe. Even though he played a lot, he was vehemently into chess. There are no mentions, actually, of him playing chess, really, in his biography or in Engels's, really, except like one reference, maybe. And in any of his wife or children's biographies or writings. No mention of it, even though Marx was apparently completely infatuated with chess. And, I just kind of briefly touched on it, how this chess game speaks to his theory. Of scientific socialism, leaving room for imagination and creativity in an otherwise extremely theoretically dense and planned out mapping of a game. So yeah, I hope that you enjoyed that. Make sure to check out that link of that dissertation because it's pretty neat. You might get something out of it. If you like what I did, like, share, subscribe, tell your friends. If there's anything I excluded, I'd like to hear about it. Like I said, I'm no chess pro. There were probably quite a few moves or variations that I missed. But yeah, that's what we have here. And yeah, catch you next time. Take care.